Chumash Bereshit only has 3 mitzvot of the 613. Right? Chazal tell us there are Taryag mitzvot, 613 mitzvot. Chumash Bereshit only has 3 of them. The 3 that are in Chumash Bereshit are Pru U'rvu, the mitzvah to have children. The second is the mitzvah of circumcision, where Avram Avinu was told to give himself a bris and to circumcise his children. And the third mitzvah is Yaakov, when the angel hit Yaakov on the thigh, and Yaakov was limping because the Gid HaNasheh, the sciatic nerve, was dislocated. So the Chumash says, therefore the Bnei Yisrael do not eat the Gid HaNasheh to commemorate Yaakov Avinu's encounter with the angel. Those are the only 3 mitzvot in Chumash Bereshit. Of those 3 mitzvot, actually, Brit Milah is the only one that is repeated later. Brit Milah actually appears 2 different places in the Torah. One is the commandment given to Avram Avinu, but then in Parshas Tazria, when the Torah gives you the different laws that apply to a woman after childbirth, so it mentions that for 7 days after the birth of a boy, she cannot be with her husband. After the birth of a girl, it's 14 days. Typically, Bisman is that's a much longer period, but according to the Torah, after 7 for a boy and after 14 for a girl, they would be allowed to have marital relations. And then the Torah says, Ubayom Hashmini, and on the 8th day, Yimol Besor or Lasso, the foreskin should be circumcised. So that's actually a repetition of Brit Milah, and the Gemara actually discusses why is there a need to repeat the mitzvah of Brit Milah twice. But Gid HaNasheh only appears once, and Pru U'rvu, well, Pru U'rvu in Bereshit Noach appears twice. It appears in Parshat Bereshit, and it appears in Parshat Noach, but you don't find a reiteration of Pru U'rvu after Matan Torah, meaning you don't find at Har Sinai that Pru U'rvu was repeated. Yeah.
But is Pru U'rvu not for all the nations because it was given before?
Yeah. So this does raise a very, very interesting question. First of all, as a simple point, Pru U'rvu does appear twice. It appears in Parshas Bereshit, and there it appears not only to humans but also to animals. You know, God said the animals should be fruitful and multiply. God said Adam and Chava should be fruitful and multiply. It is then repeated after the Mabul to Noach. So it's interesting that there's a machlokas rishonim which pasuk is actually the source of the mitzvah of Pru U'rvu. Most people assume that the source of the mitzvah of Pru U'rvu is Parshas Bereshit. But there's a problem with that, because that was even given to animals. And therefore, many Rishonim say that the Pru U'rvu in Parshat Bereshit is not a commandment, it is a blessing from God, that all types of life should be endowed with the capacity to reproduce. And therefore, it's not a mitzvah, it does not create an obligation. The obligation is only in Parshat Noach, where Noach is commanded, after the destruction of the world, to Pru U'rvu Umilu To'aretz. Now, the second question is this. Pru U'rvu is a mitzvah of the Torah, but halachically it only applies to Jews. It does not apply to non-Jews. Pru U'rvu is not one of the 7 commandments of Noach. In fact, there is a machlokes in Tosfos if non-Jews are commanded on the negative of it. Are they allowed to waste seed? Which in a sense is kind of the negative of fruitful and multiplying. So that's a machlokas, but the truth is Rabbeinu Tam even says they're allowed to waste seed because the iser of masturbation is only when there's a mitzvah of Pru U'rvu, and since non-Jews don't have a mitzvah of Pru U'rvu, they don't have a prohibition against the wasting of seed. But be it as it may, the question that one might ask very legitimately is, why shouldn't Pru U'rvu be a chiyuv on non-Jews? Bishlama Brit Milah, that was given to Avram Avinu. And Gid HaNasheh, not eating the sciatic nerve, was given to Yaakov. Al Kain lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael, es Gid HaNasheh. But Pru U'rvu, even in its second reiteration, after the Mabul, was given to Noach and his progeny. And of course, all of humanity is descended from Noach. So why would there be a rule that non-Jews are not mitzuveh in Pru U'rvu? So the Gemara in Sanhedrin lays down a rule, and this rule may sound very counterintuitive. When you first hear it, you're going to think it's the opposite idea. And it says the following. It says, any mitzvah that was given to the world before Matan Torah and was not repeated at Matan Torah only applies to Jews and not Gentiles. If it is a mitzvah that was repeated, it will apply to Jews and Gentiles. Let me give you an example of how this works. Hashem told Noach, among other things, don't murder. Right? Murder is one of the Noachite code. We were told in the Aseres Hadibros, don't murder. So since the mitzvah was both stated before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah, it applies both to Jews and Gentiles, meaning the Gentiles have the tzivoy before Matan Torah as one of the 7 commandments of Noach, and we have the tzivoy after Matan Torah. That's why Ritzicha is both one of the 613 commandments, and it's one of the 7 commandments of Noach. However, when a mitzvah was only given before Matan Torah and was not repeated at Matan Torah, essentially what happened at Matan Torah was the Jews took over all of the responsibilities of the Gentiles unless there was a separate repetition. Meaning the concept would be this. Hashem initially gave Pru U'rvu to the world. At Matan Torah, the Jewish people took over the world's responsibilities. Now, if a mitzvah is repeated at Matan Torah, that's a signification that the Jewish obligation comes from Matan Torah, and therefore the non-Jewish obligation remains intact, like murder. But if it was not repeated at Matan Torah, essentially the Jews took over those responsibilities, which means it could very well be that until Matan Torah, non-Jews were obligated to be fruitful and multiply. But once there was Matan Torah, the Jewish people took over that world's responsibility. You know, it is very interesting. I don't want to get into the politics of abortion rates in the Jewish community and birth control and everything else. Obviously, these are delicate issues, but suffice it to say that Jews, and particularly in Israel, have one of the highest abortion rates in the world. And some have calculated, and again, people get very upset with this, so I hope I won't upset anybody, that the number of neshamot, okay, well, I can only do what I can do, okay. The number of neshamot that have been lost to the Jewish people, both through intermarriage and through abortion, and maybe you could even factor in contraception, is actually much, much greater than even the Holocaust itself. Now, I know people get very, very angry if you compare anything to a Holocaust. Okay, but say it, I understand. I'm just talking about numbers here. I'm not even intending to give any type of moral condemnation. Again, halacha itself recognizes there are heterim in various situations, but we've lost a tremendous amount. So although Pru U'rvu is a mitzvah on the Jewish people, it's interesting that unfortunately the Jewish people, B'dafka, sometimes go the other way and have a relatively low birth rate, again, which is a demographical problem in Israel itself. If you factor out the very frum or the Haredi, whatever it is, birth rates are often relatively low. But again, I'll keep that aside. I remember reading a story once, someone who I knew. Well, there was 2 stories. One was a frum woman was taking her 10 children on the bus. And it was very, very, very difficult, schlepping packages, and the kids were different ages, and they were rowdy, very difficult. And the bus had to wait for a while till she was able to get everybody on the bus. So the bus driver said, with some annoyance, why don't you only take half of your kids on the bus? Just take half of them. She said, I did, okay. That's one story. The other story is a bit more biting. A Rav that I know um, was on a flight in Germany, a German airport. And also, Baruch Hashem, he and his Rebbetzin had a large family. And some German woman went by and said, kind of sarcastically, so, don't you have enough kids? Don't you have enough? What type of rude remark is that? So he looked at her and said, when we hit 6 million, I'll think of stopping. You know, at that point, we'll stop. So it's a delicate issue, but going back to the technicality, it's a little counterintuitive, meaning if it was only said to the Goyim, then it only applies to the Jews, because the Jews took over the world function unless and until there was a reiteration for Klal Yisrael, which would then suggest that the original mitzvah remains for the non-Jewish world. So that is why the Gemara says Pru U'rvu is only a mitzvah on Klal Yisrael. It is not a mitzvah on Umot HaOlam. But there's another peculiarity about Pru U'rvu. The Gemara says women are not obligated in the mitzvah of Pru U'rvu. The mitzvah of Pru U'rvu is only on a man. Now, that's a little odd, obviously, because the man cannot do it without the woman. So what does that mean essentially? A woman, halachically, does not have to have children, halachically. But a man is halachically obligated, if he's able to have children, to find a wife who is willing and desirous of having children. Even though technically it is not a, it is not a chiyuv on her part. Now, why is there no chiyuv on women? How could it be? Why should the mitzvah only be on a man and not on a woman? So let me give you first the derivation and then some of the logic. The derivation is from the lashon of the pasuk, Pru U'rvu u'mil'u es ha'aretz v'kivshuha. So what is the lashon? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, v'kivshuha, and conquer it, dominate it. Procreation is described as a form of conquest and domination. And sometimes it feels when you have kids, it's like waging war, right? You're waging war, got to conquer. So Chazal Da'avadrasha, conquest is always a male activity. Darko shel ish lichbosh. Right? That's why a woman is halachically, again, putting aside Sheirut, everything's controversial, putting aside Sheirut Leumi and putting aside women serving in the army, that's a separate issue, I don't want to talk about that. But halachically, it is absolutely prohibited for a woman to be assigned to combat duty. Women halachically are not allowed to be in combat. So whatever role they would have in the tzava would have to be in a non-combat type of role. So Darko shel, so even though the Gemara says in Sotah that when something is a milchemet mitzvah, when something is an obligatory war to fight against an enemy that's destroying us, and this certainly would qualify as milchemet mitzvah. It says everybody must go to war, and it mentions afilu chatan mechedra. We schlep the chatan out of the yichud room, but it also says kala mechupata. We take the kala from under the chuppah. But all the Rishonim explained that would refer to non-combat roles, whatever it would be, that women would be obligated to participate in some level of the war effort, but it would not be in a combat role. So going back to Pru U'rvu, since the Torah juxtaposes Pru U'rvu with kibush, conquest, so that would exclude women because women are not supposed to be involved in conquering, in conquest, and the like. Now that's the derivation. That doesn't give you the reason. That doesn't give you the logic of it. So here, I'll give you actually 3 interesting reasons that Meforshim give why women do not have an obligation of Pru U'rvu. Reason number 1 is the maternal instinct reason, and that is there is a concept that mitzvot are given for people or to people who otherwise might be reluctant to do it. So the mitzvah creates an obligation. Generally speaking, and these are generalizations, I understand that they're not universal rules. Generally speaking, a woman's maternal instinct is usually going to be stronger than the man's paternal instinct. A woman instinctually, again, I understand this is not universal, but b'derech klal, a woman instinctively very much desires to have children. And when you combine that with the biological clock, which is much more unforgiving for women than it is for men, in which there's a gavul, a woman may have a greater sense of almost desperation to try to get her kids in. A man could take his time, right? A man could have a child at 90, like Strom Thurmond, a United States Senator, etc. So therefore, the Torah had to give a mitzvah to men, because otherwise men might take their sweet time getting married and having children. There's less of a nechitzut to give a mitzvah to women, because women will naturally want to do it anyway. That's reason number one. Reason number two, interestingly enough, almost says the opposite. And that is pregnancy and childbirth, to this very day, can be life-threatening conditions. Baruch Hashem, in industrial societies, the rates of morbidity in childbirth is much lower than it was, but it's not insignificant. It still exists, even in the most advanced countries. If a woman goes into labor, we treat that as pikuach nefesh, and we violate. Actually, it's not a violation, but we drive on Shabbat. We do whatever we can because pikuach nefesh overrides Shabbos. So the Torah cannot command a woman, you must have children, because the Torah is not going to tell a person, you must endanger your life. The Torah can tell a man, find a woman who's happy to take on those risks. So I, as a man, should find a woman who wants to do this. But the Torah cannot command a woman to do it, because she is the one whose life is going to be at risk by doing it. So it's almost the opposite, right? The first reason said, oh, she'll want to have children anyway. The second reason says, oh, it's dangerous, so the Torah is not going to obligate her to go through this. The most the Torah can obligate is that the man find a wife who wants to go through this experience. Yeah. That's true, but this isn't necessarily one of them,
I know,
yeah.
but that means that it's not a general rule that Hashem will not put anybody in a situation where with a mitzvah where they have to give up their lives.
No, you're right, but I think a very big difference would be that those things are occasional things that don't happen that often. But if you were to say every pregnancy theoretically could create sakana, or every child, yeah.
So if it's an obligation for a man, if the woman doesn't want to do it or she can't, is it an obligation for him to have a surrogate?
Right. So I'll discuss that. I'll get to that. That's a very important question. Yeah.
With that, when the woman's life is in danger if she has the child,
Yeah.
according to Judaism, you save the woman.
Yes, that is correct. In fact,
So
even
that's why,
that is correct. Obviously, the classic case where halacha permits abortion and even may require abortion is if the woman's life is actually in danger. And the halacha is that we save the mother, even if that will be at the expense of the baby. By the way, just as a little aside, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, that is not the teaching of the Catholic Church. People don't realize this. The Catholic Church is not only against abortion, Judaism is also against abortion generally. But under the Catholic Church, you're not allowed to save the mother if that would mean aborting the baby, because they're considered to be of equal weight and you cannot kill one to save the other. Judaism does reject that argument, and Judaism absolutely says that we save the mother even if we have to abort the child. Now, interestingly enough, there is a machlokas why that's so. Because generally speaking, You don't kill one person to save another person. So why are you allowed to kill the baby to save the mother? There's a big machlokes, Rashi. In other words, again, the din that you abort, that's in the Mishnah. There's no machlokes about the din. The machlokes is, what's the logic of the din? Rashi says, because the fetus is not a complete person yet. The fetus is not a nefesh gamor until it's born, and therefore the rights of an actual life take precedence over the potential life of a fetus, because it's not a nefesh gamor. Meaning, even though abortion is prohibited generally, it's not because the fetus is considered to be a complete human life. It is actually not, according to Rashi, it is not considered a complete human life until birth. And that's why the mother's life would have precedence. That is Rashi's reason. Rambam gives a totally different reason. Rambam says the rule that you cannot kill one person to save another person never applies if the one that you're killing is called a rodef. A rodef is a pursuer. I mean, a very simple example. I can kill a terrorist who is about to kill somebody else. How can I kill one person to save another person? Well, when that person is a rodef, of course I can kill him. Now again, keep in mind that the law of rodef is not based on punishment. I'm not punishing the rodef. The law of rodef is based on prevention. This is very important. This is why halachically, once a rodef has been immobilized, he can only be killed through a trial and a conviction. Meaning, if I were to kill a terrorist who's already in custody, and that terrorist has not been tried, that actually would be murder. In fact, this was a case in Israel a few years ago. There was a YouTube video. Everything is on YouTube today. Where what it looked like, now this is a big question, that a terrorist was immobilized on the ground, he had no weapon, and Chayal went over to him and just put a gun to his head and shot him, and the Chayal was court-martialed and tried for the crime of murder. And the argument, the halachic argument was that you could certainly kill a terrorist who has a weapon and can kill somebody, because that's the law of rodef, but when the terrorist is no longer a danger, you wouldn't be allowed to do it. Now, the truth is, in that particular case, the facts were very, very disputed, because the Chayol claimed that the terrorist was reaching for a weapon. Okay, so again, the particulars of those facts are not really important for our case, but the principle is very true. Once a rodef is immobilized, the only heter of killing him would be the capital punishment imposed by a court or by a beis din. But when the person is an active rodef, anybody can kill him. Anybody. Now, that's a well-known idea, but here's what the Rambam's chiddush is. When we think of rodef, we think of bad people, we think of terrorists, we think of criminals, we think of enemies in time of war, we think of Hamas. And surely they're rodefs. But the Rambam is machadesh, based on a Gemara, that there's such a thing as a benign rodef. There's such a thing as a benevolent rodef. An example would be, strangely enough, let's imagine you had a 2-year-old who walks into your Shabbos meal, brandishing a loaded gun that his father didn't put the gun away, God forbid, and he's brandishing a gun, and the gun could go off and kill somebody any minute. Now, this is a real tragic case, and I hope you won't hate me for bringing this up. Obviously, if there's a way to get the child to drop the gun, or you can take the gun away from the child, of course you've got to do that. But if you have a situation where it's likely that the gun will go off and kill somebody, halachically, as hard as this is, the baby may be classified as a rodef. And you would be permitted, halachically, if there was no alternative, to kill the baby in order to prevent. So the law of rodef is not only for bad people. Babies can be rodef. In fact, to give you another story that you'll hate me for, they tell a story in the Holocaust about Jews that were hiding in a bunker. and the Nazis came to a house. They were looking for people, and the Jews were hiding. But there was a little baby in the group, and the baby started crying, and that would give away the whereabouts. So the story that they tell is the mother put a blanket over the baby's mouth just to muffle the cry, and tragically the baby suffocated, meaning it was an accident. That's tragic enough. But now I'll tell you something, you'll hate me, and that is, according to halacha, it actually may be possible that the baby could be killed. Because if the baby's cries are going to give away the whereabouts of the people, and the baby is going to endanger everybody else, the baby would be classified as a non-malevolent rodef, and the law of rodef kicks in. Again, these are tragic scenarios, but theoretically they can exist. A lifeboat. If a lifeboat, Titanic, right? A lifeboat can only hold 10 people. And if there's an 11th person on the lifeboat, the boat is going to capsize, the boat is going to break, or the boat is going to sink. And there are 10 people on the boat, and some 11th guy jumps in. You know, halachically, he can be thrown overboard. He can be thrown overboard because he's a rodef for the rest of the people. Now, if you don't know who's number 11, it's very complicated. In other words, there are 11 people on the boat. We don't know the order. They all jumped on the boat at the same time. So at that point, if I want to throw you over, you can say, hey, why do I go over? You go. You know, who says I'm the rodef of the other 10? You know, maybe you're the rodef of the other 10. Those are very complicated. And it might be halachically. You either have to go with a volunteer or draw lots, or the whole boat might have to sink because you can't prefer one person over another person. But if you can identify the 11th guy, actually, it's actually not, I'll say it is not the heaviest one, because if the heaviest one, I understand, if the heaviest one is within the first 10, he is not a rodef because the boat is not going to break in spite of his weight. So you can't just say the heaviest one or whatever it would be. Baruch Hashem. So, you know, it has to be the last one. The proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back is the rodef, even if it's only a straw. And the like, yeah.
Yeah, this also reminds me of the dilemmas when, let's say, they were besieging a city and they said, give us one man, otherwise we kill you all. So the difference if they tell you which man, if they don't tell you.
Yes, this is exactly right. The goyim surround, the classic case. The goyim surround the city. I mean, Nazis often played these games and say, give us a Jew that we can kill, or we will wipe out the whole city. According to halacha, maybe a guy could volunteer, that's a machlokas, but certainly we cannot pick somebody and send him out because we don't have the right to save the city even by killing an innocent person. But if they come in and they ask for a specific person, give us Chaim, because they're looking for Chaim, or we will wipe out the city. At least according to one opinion, we are permitted to deliver Chaim, and part of that is because if Chaim is the reason why our city is being endangered, Chaim might become a rodef. Chaim himself becomes the reason for our endangerment, and there would be a heter of rodef. So I just want to go back to the Rambam. So what the Rambam says is the following. If a baby can be a rodef, even a fetus can be a rodef. So the Rambam's argument is, if the mother's life is in danger because of the pregnancy, because of the baby, then the baby is halachically classified as a rodef. So again, you see the machlokas here. According to Rashi, the heter of killing the baby to save the mother is because the baby, the unborn baby, is not a complete nefesh, and therefore the mother's life has priority. That's Rashi. According to Rambam, the baby is a rodef. Now, there is a real kasha on the Rambam, a very famous kasha. The Mishnah in Maseches Oelo says, you're only allowed to kill the baby before the baby's head has emerged. Once a majority of the baby's head has emerged, the baby is treated as a born baby. And as a born baby, you cannot kill a born baby to save the mother's life. Now, according to Rashi, this is very understandable. Because Rashi says the whole heter to kill the baby to save the mother is because the baby is not yet a complete life. So according to Rashi, it's very, very logical. Once the baby is born, he's on equal standing with the mother, so you can't kill one to save the other. But according to the Rambam, it's very, very difficult. According to the Rambam, the heter is not because the baby is not a complete life. The heter is because if the baby is endangering the mother's life, the baby is a rodef. Well, rodef certainly applies to born children. I gave you examples of babies being a rodef. So even if the child is born, if delivery of this baby can cause the death of the mother, why shouldn't there be a din of rodef? So this is a famous, we don't really have time really to go into all the different answers to this, but this is a famous question on the Rambam. If the Rambam understands the Mishnah is based on the law of rodef, why would there be a difference between the baby's head coming out or the baby's head not coming out? As opposed to Rashi, the distinction is very, very, very clear why there would be that difference. But that's the chiddush of the Rambam, that if the mother's life is in danger, there's a din of rodef. The unborn baby can be treated as a rodef. Yeah.
So I heard a story, it's true, that during the Holocaust, a man went and hid, and
Sorry, a man did what? Didn't hear you.
went to hid,
Oh, yeah.
and they couldn't find him,
Yeah.
but he could hear that the commandant said, unless he comes out, I will kill people. He did not come out, but the question to me is, who's the rodef there? Is the rodef the person that didn't come out because he wouldn't have done it, or is the rodef the person that's doing the killing?
Well, obviously the person who's doing the killing is certainly the rodef. But if you're asking me the question,
Yes, with the other
that's a very good question. I think there is an argument. Again, it's similar. Remember, it's similar to the case where the Goyim say, "Give us chayim or we'll kill." That's exactly what they're saying here. I mean, they're saying, "Give us an identified person." So the truth of the matter is, according to Rav Yochanan in the Talmud Yerushalmi, Chaim has to deliver himself. Chaim is a rodef. On the other hand, according to the Rambam says a qualification that even an identified person can be surrendered only if he did something for which he deserves the death penalty, like he's a murderer or whatever. If he's totally an innocent person. So this is really a machlokes between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish in the Talmud Yerushalmi. Yeah.
Wouldn't another reason be because he could have come out and they still would have killed him and all the other people? So if he knew,
Oh, is that the situation?
no, I'm not saying it was.
Yeah.
But in his thinking, if I was standing there, and I'd say yes, I'd give myself up if I knew for sure the road date.
Oh, sure. That would
But
be
in his thinking,
yeah.
I'm
No,
trying to think in his mind.
no, you're correct. I mean, if they're going to kill the whole group anyway,
Right.
and I could save my life.
Just do it.
Now, if you think about this has a lot of repercussions. Which again, a lot of them, some of these are Holocaust questions. Some of these may be questions even today, and that is the notion of escape. Right? Every time, the relatively few times that Jews escaped from concentration camps. Okay, and, there were not an amazingly large number, but there were people that escaped. They went into the forest, became partisans. But the problem was, this always involved severe retaliation on the part of the Germans. So if one person escaped, they might kill 500 people, whatever it might be. So the interesting question is, am I allowed to escape? I mean, can I save my life if that's going to result in maybe hundreds of people getting killed? Now, you'll have the same problem, Litzarenu Hagadol, even with hostages, the different things. Somebody escapes, somebody is rescued. Even if someone's rescued, the question is, what is the impact on everybody else in terms of their conditions? So it's not so pashut, as it were, if you're allowed to take steps that will endanger the lives of others. And your example of the guy hiding and not revealing himself is a good example. But nevertheless, according to the Rambam's view, it would seem that you would be allowed to self preserve yourself. Yeah.
Torah, in our tradition, an imprimatur on the procedure of drawing lots. So in the hypothetical situation where the enemies are demanding one person to be sent out to be killed, would this be some kind of lottery to determine who it is who gets sent out?
Yes, but the lottery would have to be by unanimous consent, meaning to say, you would not be able to condemn a person to death who had not agreed to the lottery procedure. But you are correct. There is a certain divinity in lottery that we consider, but that's only if there's a consensual agreement to it. You could not force it. Okay. Now, I don't know how I got onto all of this. This was a bit of a digression. Oh, okay, your fault. Okay. But be it as it may, I think I was explaining the different reasons why women don't have the mitzvah of Pru U'rvu. Now I want to give you a third reason, a very, very fascinating reason from the Meshech Chochma. The Meshech Chochma is Rav Meir Simcha HaKohen of Dvinsk. His most famous book is Or Sameach. The yeshiva Or Sameach is named after Rav Meir Simcha. Meir Simcha was quite an amazing gadol, and he offers the following. Everyone knows the famous verse in Mishlei that we recite every time we put back the Torah. Jurachaha darchei noam. The Torah are ways of pleasantness. V'chol nisivaisaha shalom, and all of its pathways lead to peace. Now, for the most part, those are nice, beautiful sentiments, but they tend not to have practical halachic ramifications. Man, you'll never hear a real posek say, okay, you can drive to shul on Shabbos because it's unpleasant to walk and the Torah's ways are pleasant. Or, gay marriage. I mean, now, those who are not Orthodox do use those. But anyone that's familiar with halacha knows that we don't use Dracha Darchei Noam in tangible halachic ways. It expresses a view of Judaism, a view of Torah, but it never changes halacha. But Rav Meir Simcha points out there are some instances where the Gemara itself uses Dracha Darchei Noam in concrete halachic ways. For example, the Gemara discusses when it says by an esrog, the Torah doesn't say take an esrog. What's the lesson of the Torah? Take a pre-ate sadar. Take the fruit of a beautiful tree or a beautiful fruit of a tree, however you translate it. And the Gemara comes up with different possibilities. Who says it's esrog? Could be this, could be that. And one of the possibilities was a beautiful fruit that grew on branches that had a lot of thorns. And the Torah says, or the Gemara says, it's not possible that the Torah says you got to take a fruit that has a lot of thorns around it, because that would cause pain and Jirachaha Darchei Noam. Or the Gemara gives another case like this, Yibum. What's the mitzvah of Yibum? The mitzvah of Yibum is, if a man dies without children, so there's a mitzvah on his brother to marry the widow to perpetuate the seed of the brother who died. And if she doesn't want or he doesn't want, there's a chalitza ceremony where she takes off his shoe and she spits in front of him, not in his face, in front of him, and says, so shall be done to the man who does not want to rebuild. Now, a woman is not allowed to get married. If a woman is widowed without children, she is not allowed to get married until there's yibum or chalitza. Okay, she cannot get married without yibum or chalitza. Today we mainly do chalitza, but yibum is the other possibility. Yibum is mamish marriage. Now, the Gemara discusses the following. What if husband died and there was a child? And then the child died. So at the time the husband died, she was allowed to marry because she was not a yavama. But she became a yavama later. Does she now have a problem of having to leave her second husband because she needs chalitza or yibum from the first guy? So the Gemara says that's not possible. Because to say that after a woman who got married beheter would have to leave her second husband because of a post-event would be a violation of the principle of Drachaha Darchei Noam. The Torah is pleasant. And therefore the result is a woman is a Yavama only if her child died before her husband died. But if her child died after her husband died, even 1 second, she's exempt. She can go out and get married, because if you go the other way around, this could actually cause a breakup of a marriage. And that would be a violation of Jirachaha Darchei Noam. So this is a very important halacha l'maisa, meaning to say, the rules that a woman needs, yibum or chalitza, only applies if she had no children or the children predeceased her husband. If a child died after the husband, even if it was 1 second later, she is totally exempt from yibum chalitza. She is free to marry anyone that she wants. Okay, so now says Rabbi. Yeah.
What if the husband had a child with another woman before this woman, so his seed has already been...
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's an important point that you're making.
Here's the question.
Yeah, the question was, what if the husband had children from an earlier spouse? Yeah, so this is an important point. Yibum depends totally on the husband's children, not on the wife's children. And therefore, if the husband has surviving children from any spouse, she does not need Yibum or Chalitza. Conversely, if she had children from an earlier husband, but he has no children, she would need it. So it all depends on perpetuating the seed of the husband. By the way, as a little aside, let me just point out that Bisman Hazeh, the Ramah Paskins for Ashkenazim, that we do not do Yibam, that even if the woman and the brother want to get married, let's say the brother is single, the minhag of Ashkenazim is we do not even allow Yibam, and we do Chalitza. All we do is Chalitza. We do not do Yibam Bisman Hazeh. Sfardim, in theory at least, can practice Yibam, and they sometimes even today do practice Yibam, but Ashkenazim do not. So the reason it's so, it's based on an opinion in the Gemara that says the following. One of the oddities of halacha is that marrying your brother's widow is actually an Isser D'Oraisa. It's called incestuous unless there's a mitzvah of Yibam. So, for example, if you were to marry, if a man were to marry his sister-in-law, and there are children, not only wouldn't it be a mitzvah, it would be a very serious aveira. In other words, it's either an aveira or a mitzvah. So Abba Shaul says, since intrinsically it's halachically incest, you're only allowed to do it if your kavana is 100% pure for the mitzvah. And since Bisman Hazeh, we suspect that kavanot are not completely pure, we treat the mitzvah act as if it's a sinful act, and therefore we don't allow it. In fact, there's a great story. All of you have
We treat it as what?
a sinful act, sinful avera, sinful act. In fact, there's a great story. I'm sure you've heard of the Gadol Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski, who was the Gadol Ador, together with the Chafetz Chaim. And for much of his life, his health was not great. So he used to go to the forest areas on the German-Polish border. There were four. These were summer places that they were like the Catskills in Poland that people would often go to. And usually he would go for the month of Av and come back to Vilna for Elul and Yomim Noraim. But one time, the doctor's order said he needed a more relaxed environment. He had to stay till after Sukkot. And he was very tzibrochen. He was very, very sad because, there were Jews there and there were even synagogues there, but, it was not Vilna. It did not have the intensity of religious life. There weren't people who were that from there. So he's wandering around like, why is he stuck? Why did Hashem leave him here? So all of a sudden he sees in the distance a Polish Yid, a Yid who looks like he's from Poland. He has beard, payas, So he's so happy. He's a landsman, so to speak. So he goes over to the man and says, Baruch Hashem, to see a Yid from Poland. It's so great. He says, what brings you here? So the guy says like this. The guy says, I'm here, difficult. He didn't know who Rav Chaim Ozer was. He says, difficult situation. He says, my brother was a forest ranger here. My brother died suddenly, and he left his almana with 3 young children to raise. So I figured, how can she take care of 3 young children by herself? So I figured I would come, I would marry her, and I would help raise the family. Now, that's an Isser D'Oraisa. To marry your brother's widow when there's children is an Isser D'Oraisa. So Rav Chaim Ozer says, Rabbi Yed, what you're saying is a big Aveira. It's an Aveira. You're not allowed to do it. So he says, I'm not going to listen to some guy who just tells me I'm not allowed to do something. He says, it's a very nice thing. It's an act of chesed. It's an act of kindness. He says, I can't just hear some guy who tells me I'm not allowed to do it. So Rav Chaim Ozer again says, this is not a chumrah of some commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. This is in the Chumash. The Chumash says, you cannot marry your brother's widow. So he says, listen, I have a plan. I have a tachnit. I thought this out. I myself am not married. I lost my wife, so therefore I'm available. Why shouldn't I do this? So Rav Chaim Ozer really is in desperation. He says, how could I convince you? He says, what can I do to show you this? So the man said, I would have to hear it from a real great authoritative rabbi. So Rav Chaim Ozer says, like whom? He says, it has to be Rav Grodzinski of Vilna. Says, anybody short of that, I'm not going to listen to. So Rav Chaim Ozer says, I don't know how he proved it, but he says, that's me. And then he realized why HaKadosh Baruch Hu left him in the forest there, that way he could protect a Jew from committing an Aveira. On the other hand, I have to admit that, it makes me a little uneasy. In other words, because what the guy wanted to do seems like a very nice thing to do, right? It's a good thing to do. And yet, it's absolutely forbidden. So gives you a little bit of unease there. But in fact, it is usher. Eishes ach sheyesh lo banim is an Isser D'Oraisa.
Some of these sins are called chesed.
Yeah,
Chesed.
that's right. Just like marrying a sister is called chesed, right? Because it is an expression of love, but it's a perverse way. All right, so now let me get back to the Meshech Chachma for the third reason why women are not chayiv in Pru U'rvu. He says Gavaldik. He says, I guess, all of us know, without even getting into the reason, that the Torah permits male polygamy. The Torah permits a man to have more than one wife. The Torah does not permit a woman to have more than one husband. Now we can talk about why that's. I'm going to leave that for another class. But just given the reality that male polygamy is permitted, and female, I think it's called polyandry, is not allowed. Now, so says Rabbi Meir Simcha the following: if the Torah would have put the mitzvah of procreation on a woman, so let's say the woman is capable of having children, and she's married to a man who can't have children, the Torah, since she does not have the option of another husband, the only avenue open would be mandatory divorce. And therefore the Torah didn't want to put the mitzvah on the woman because that might compel the breakup of a marriage. Masha'ein kain. And that would be a violation of Derachaha Darchei Noah. Masha'ein kain. When you put the mitzvah on the man, then even if the woman is incapable of having children, there does not have to be a marital breakup. There can be the option of a pilegesh or another wife. And therefore, the Torah situated the mitzvah where the possibilities of marital breakup would be minimized. Now, problem is, that works very well until the ban of Rabbeinu Gershom. Right? In the 11th century, in the 1000s, the great leader of Ashkenazic Jewry, Rav Gershon ben Yehuda, who was just situated, he was the Rebbe of Rashi, so he was 2 generations before Rashi, and he and his Beis Din were considered to be the supreme authorities, halachically, over the Ashkenazic communities, which were essentially Germany, Poland, and parts of Russia. That was their jurisdiction. And he and his beis din really made a number of takanot, and among the most famous of the takanot was the banning of polygamy among Ashkenazic Jews. Now, since Rabbeinu Gershom did not have jurisdiction, so to speak, over Sephardim in Islamic countries, Sephardim were able to continue. Now, one could make an interesting historical argument because Ashkenazic countries were Christian. Christianity prohibits polygamy. Sephardic were in Muslim countries that permitted it. So one question is Rabbeinu Gershom simply following the prevailing zeitgeist? I mean, in other words, it would be a chilul Hashem for Christians to consider something improper, and we go ahead and do it. Okay, whatever the reason is. But bottom line is, if you're an Ashkenazi, now there was a little discussion. Some say Rabbeinu Gershom initially made his takana to expire in the 6th millennium, which is the year 5000. That would have been 785 years ago, meaning it had an expiration date. So some still argue that polygamy is permitted today because Rabbeinu Gershom's takana expired, but Rav Yosef Karo says it got renewed by other, but they didn't. So halachically, we have the ban of Rabbeinu Gershom. So here's the question. If it's true, if I'm an Ashkenazi Jew and I am bound by the takana of Rabbeinu Gershom, if I'm able to have children, my wife is not able, right? So what do? Am I obligated to get divorced in order to fulfill Pru U'rvu? So the truth of the matter is, under the law of the Gemara, you would be obligated, a man would be obligated to get divorced. The Mishnah lays down a rule that you give a 10-year waiting period to see children, and if you move to Eretz Yisrael, the clock gets restarted because of the Zchut of Eretz Yisrael, but at the end of the day, you are mechuyev to get divorced. But the Ramah says, Bizman hazeh, we do not follow this. It's not clear what authority the Ramah has, but he says we don't break up marriages for whatever reason. So as a practical matter, the person, this is very, very strange halacha, the person may have an obligation to do something, but the beis din is not going to tell him to do it. It's a matter of conscience and individualized determination, because I think the Chachamim understood that divorce is not a light idea to be bandied around with casualness, and you don't destroy people's lives, but it is a shikul that people have to weigh. And practically what would happen, I don't know. As I say, this would only apply if the man is capable and the woman is not. Obviously, if the man has a problem, then this wouldn't be relevant, the divorce or whatever it would be. Somebody told me, I don't know if it's true, that the Babich Rebbe, who we know didn't have children, but he wanted to be Mekayim the halacha, that if you're married 10 years without children, you must divorce your wife. Somebody told me that every 10 years, I don't know if it's true, he would give a get to his wife and then remarry her again, because he wanted to be Mekayim the halacha in a literal way. Of course, that's not going to work if you are a Kohen, because the first get is going to disqualify you. But it is difficult. So the question that was asked, would a man have to divorce his wife, Bizman hazeh? It's a strange halacha. Technically, yes, but he would not be told to do so. No rabbi would tell him to do it. And therefore, it's considered to be a matter of conscience and a matter of shikol. One other thing I want to mention, can one fulfill Pru U'rvu by adoption? So the truth of the matter is, there is a statement in the Gemara that anyone who raises an orphan in his home is as if he gave birth to them. This is what the Gemara says. Kol magadol yasam v'yasayim b'tach beso ma'ila lafakasav ki'ilu yalada. So Rav Shlomo Kluger, who was one of the great 19th century poskim, very prolific. He wrote over 300 svarim, big svarim. He actually paskins that one could be Mekayim Pru U'rvu by adoption, because if the Torah considers it as if you gave birth, you're Mekayim. However, I have to say, in all fairness, that Rav Shlomo Kluger is a minority of one. The vast majority of all poskim say that although adopting a child, raising a child is a wonderful thing, absolutely a wonderful thing, but technically Pru U'rvu does require biological children. So if the person doesn't have a child, that's not, I mean, that's not his fault. That's what Hashem did. But in terms of the Kiyum mitzvah, the Kiyum mitzvah does require a biological
Can I
child.
ask a